So, we start off with our main guy, Arata Kaizaki. He's a 27-year-old who's basically hit rock bottom. No job, no prospects, and he's lying to his friends about having a steady gig. Yikes! One night, while stumbling home drunk, Arata runs into this mysterious dude named Ryo Yoake. This guy offers him a chance to turn his life around with something called the ReLIFE project. Sounds sketchy, right? But here's the kicker. They want Arata to take a pill that will make him look 10 years younger and go back to high school for a year. In exchange, they'll foot the bill for his living expenses and help him find a job after. Arata's desperate enough to agree. Boom! Next morning, Arata wakes up looking like a teenager again. He heads to school and meets his classmates. There's Chizuru Hishiro, the awkward girl with no social skills but a weirdly intense desire to make friends, and Kazuomi Oga, the smart but oblivious class rep. Arata struggles to fit in, especially since he's been out of school for nearly a decade. He even flunks a test on his first day. Oh, tough break, buddy. Meanwhile, Ryo Yoake, who's now posing as a school counselor, keeps tabs on Arata's progress. Arata's mission is to rediscover what he lost and figure out why he's stuck in such a rut. It's not just about blending in, but actually finding a way to change his future for the better. Arata's starting to realize that his high school redo might be more challenging than he thought. He's got a long way to go, but hey, that's what makes it interesting. Arata Kaizaki is still adjusting to his new high school life. Remember, he's a 27-year-old guy looking like a teenager thanks to that ReLIFE pill, so the struggle is real. First, we see Arata trying to fit in during PE class, and it's a disaster. He's totally out of shape and can't keep up with the kids who are a decade younger. Talk about a rough start. But hey, at least it's good for a few laughs. Next, we meet some of Arata's classmates. There's Rina Karyu, a super competitive girl who's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder, especially towards Chizuru Hishiro, the socially awkward classmate. Speaking of Hishiro, she's trying to follow Arata's advice on making friends, but her creepy smile is just not cutting it. Arata tries to help her out, but it's like teaching a robot to be human. Good luck with that, dude. Meanwhile, we see more of Ryo Yoake, the ReLIFE agent, who's keeping a close eye on Arata. He's not just there to observe, he's actually trying to give Arata pointers. But let's be real, he's also enjoying watching Arata fumble around. Arata wakes up in the nurse's office and learns from the school nurse that Chizuru found them unconscious and brought their things. Arata explains that they slipped and fell down the stairs. The nurse praises him for shielding Rina from the impact with his body. Arata is reminded of his old job when the nurse is called to the staff room, leaving him to watch over the unconscious Rina. He recalls how his senior at work was bullied by her co-workers who used to be friendly rivals but turned to sabotage and bullying. Arata was upset by their behavior and confronted her about it. She explained that their actions made her sad, not angry. Rina regains consciousness and Arata first checks if she's okay before asking about her intentions with Chizuru's bag. At first, Rina is silent, but Arata insists she face the issue. Rina admits she didn't want to steal anything but just wanted to inconvenience Chizuru. Arata, surprised, wonders why she would resort to harassment instead of trying to improve. He tells her this behavior makes him sad because it invalidates her hard work. Rina breaks down and vents her frustrations, saying her efforts are never enough, and that Chizuru and Hanuka don't even see her as a rival. Arata comforts her with a head pat, telling her that her hard work has improved her, even if she can't see it because she's always comparing herself to them. His words help her realize her efforts weren't wasted. After calming down, Arata explains that Chizuru also struggles and studies hard, mentioning that she was in the staff room asking teachers questions she couldn't answer on her own. Arata explains that Chizuru is awkward and working on her social skills. He advises Rina to ask Chizuru for a smile next time to understand her better. As Arata leaves school, he thinks he sounded like an old man talking to a child. His thoughts are interrupted when he sees Chizuru waiting for him at the school gates. She asks why Rina had her bag. Arata initially lies, saying Rina was keeping it safe, but then decides to tell the truth, thinking it's better for them to resolve the issue honestly. Chizuru is confused because she thought she was getting along with Rina, having made efforts to smile at her. Arata tries to explain, but Chizuru struggles to understand emotions. She decides to talk to Rina directly to resolve the situation. Before Arata leaves, Chizuru wonders why she felt a strong emotion when she saw him comforting Rina. Chizuru decides to focus on one problem at a time to be more efficient. Meanwhile, Arata is too curious to leave, so he hides behind a bush and finds Ryo already there, observing the situation. Although upset with Ryo for meddling, Arata joins him to watch how things unfold between the girls. When Rina leaves the school, Chizuru confronts her immediately, revealing that Arata already told her the truth. Rina tries to avoid the situation, but Arata's advice to face her problems echoes in her mind. She then tells Chizuru how she feels, admitting she hates Chizuru for taking her place, winning the silver pin, and mocking her every time they lock eyes. Chizuru is shocked and insists she never meant to mock Rina. Remembering Arata's suggestion, Rina asks Chizuru to smile. When Chizuru smiles, Rina realizes she misunderstood everything. In shock, Rina asks why Chizuru smiled at her like that. Chizuru explains she was smiling a lot because she hoped they would become friends. Realizing it was all a misunderstanding, Rina bursts out laughing. Chizuru continues to explain why she struggles with understanding people and social interactions, adding that she's trying to improve. Chizuru then asks if Rina would like to become her friend. Rina realizes Chizuru is just awkward but honest and agrees to be friends. She apologizes for their misunderstanding and Chizuru quickly accepts, saying it's only natural since they are now friends. Back at Arata's place, Ryo joins him in celebrating the outcome. Arata wonders if he did the right thing by advising Rina, thinking about how the adult world can be harsh. Ryo reassures him that even if Rina doesn't remember him after the experiment, his lesson will stay with her. Besides, what he told her was true and helped him reflect on himself, showing his progress. Although annoyed by Ryo's spin on the situation, Arata doesn't disagree. Chizuru, still curious about her feelings when she saw Arata with his arms around Rina, decides to research it on the internet. Upon discovering that her feelings are related to love, Chizuru is in disbelief. During the Golden Week holidays, Arata is relaxing at home when he gets a call from Kazuomi. Kazuomi and An are at his door, ready to study together. Since they didn't inform him beforehand, Arata quickly hides all the beer and cigarettes lying around and freshens the air to get rid of the smoke smell. Once everything is out of sight, he lets them in. As they settle in, the study session begins. Mortified by their poor results, Kazuomi wonders how the two of them managed to transfer into this school. Although Kazuomi isn't pushing them too hard, Arata and An quickly get burnt out. This worries Kazuomi since midterm tests are next week. She decides to check Arata's calendar in his room and notices his notes about job interviews he had before signing up for the experiment. Seeing this, Arata quickly snatches the calendar away from her. Suddenly, Kazuomi receives a phone call and has to leave for his part-time job, leaving Arata feeling uneasy being alone with An. An suggests they leave together, but Arata declines, stressing the importance of studying for the upcoming tests. Despite Kazuomi's hesitation, Arata reluctantly goes back to An, making sure she's comfortable staying alone at his place. After An assures him she's fine, Arata tries to relax. Meanwhile, Ryo decides to eavesdrop on Arata as part of his regular surveillance. When he hears An's voice in Arata's room, he hurries to his place. An asks Arata about the notes she saw on the calendar, and he admits they were for his part-time job, explaining he worked at a convenience store, which surprises her. Confirming he did indeed work there, An reveals she had met him there before, noting he seemed more mature then. Arata suggests it might have been because of the work uniform, laughing as he explains. Then An inquires if he likes someone. Caught off guard, Arata briefly considers Chizuru but denies having feelings for anyone.
Relieved, An confesses that she's glad Arata isn't taken and that they ended up in the same class. She reveals that she fell in love with him from the moment she saw him at the store. Arata is speechless at her confession, but An doesn't stop there. She starts making a move on him, declaring she wants to be his girlfriend. Despite her charms, Arata gathers himself and stops her advances, advising her to take better care of herself. Just then, Ryo arrives at the apartment and bursts in through the door. Surprised to see him, Arata wonders why he's here all of a sudden. Instead of answering, Ryo walks over to him and starts giving An an earful. It turns out An just isn't another classmate, but Ryo's colleague from work. She explains that she wanted to test how Arata would react if a real high school girl made a move on him. Ryo commends Arata for proving to be exactly the kind of nice gentleman he believed he would be. An apologizes to Arata for putting him on the spot and admits that her confession was partially untrue. She confesses that she did meet him at the convenience store where she was initially supposed to be his supporter. However, due to not completing her training in time, Ryo had to take over. Ryo expresses dissatisfaction with An's actions, as they're not meant to interact too much with Arata during his ReLIFE experience. He apologizes sincerely for causing Arata distress, and An follows suit. Arata decides to grab a drink to unwind and accepts their apologies, mentioning that he isn't overly upset with them anyway. While drafting a report on Arata's progress, Ryo reflects on his past experiences with previous subjects. He discloses that his final year in school wasn't exactly as he had described to Arata. Ryo had already started working then and faced criticism from his superiors for becoming too involved with the subject. As a result, he had to scale back the assistance he provided. Following new directives, Ryo refrained from offering help when his subject sought advice, citing the need to maintain distance to ensure the experiment's integrity. During this time, he was tasked with evaluating Arata's suitability for the next experiment. After assessing Arata's character at the part-time job, Ryo concluded that he was an ideal test subject. Suddenly, An arrives and questions why Ryo is observing the subject she's supposed to support. Ryo quickly explains that it's a directive from higher authorities, causing An to drop the subject. An then asks about Arata's progress with the initial subject, to which Ryo responds that while human behavior is unpredictable, he's faithfully following instructions. Regrettably, the initial experiment ended without success, with the subject showing no improvement by year end. Ryo's boss blamed him for insufficient support, claiming he should have done more to prevent the failure. Disheartened, Ryo shares the news with his subject, apologizing for the setback in finding them a job due to the experiment's outcome. On his way back to the office, An consoles Ryo, who vents his frustration over the conflicting demands placed on him. An then reveals that Arata has been chosen as the next test subject, with Ryo assigned as his support instead of her. Encouraging Ryo to move forward, An stresses there's no time to dwell on it. Despite his lingering doubts, Ryo shifts his attention to Arata and convinces him to participate in the experiment. With An's assistant, Ryo begins preparations to support Arata in his new role as the test subject. An finds it amusing that both she and Ryo will be in the same class, despite her being his junior. She tries to reassure Ryo, saying Arata shouldn't pose any problems. However, Ryo quickly raises doubts, explaining Arata's deep-seated trauma and feelings of responsibility for past events, which may affect his confidence and social skills. Nevertheless, An reassures Ryo that they can help Arata overcome these challenges. They plan to assist Arata in briefly returning to childhood so that he can quit his part-time job before the school year begins. Despite the difficulties, Ryo remains optimistic about Arata's potential, noting his enthusiasm for the opportunity. In his report, Ryo expresses excitement about experiencing student life with Arata. He observes how Arata's forward thinking and growth are already influencing those around him, sparking his curiosity about the long-term impacts of these changes. The midterm test results are in, and Arata hasn't fared well, failing 7 of them and earning himself more makeup tests. Called to the staff room once more, his teacher, Kokoro, delivers a stern message, but also commends Arata's hard work, expressing confidence that he'll pass with continued effort, just as he did with previous tests. Her words lift Arata's spirits, showing him he's made progress despite setbacks. Unexpectedly, Hanuka, the girls' volleyball team captain, also faces makeup tests. She confides in Arata about her own struggles with exams, revealing her dependence on a sports scholarship and her gratitude for Rina's friendship, which lightens the load of intense volleyball practices. Kokoro reminds Hanuka of the importance of passing these tests to avoid missing the upcoming volleyball tournament. As Arata heads back to the classroom to collect his things, he runs into Chizuru, who's getting ready to leave for home. Knowing she walks alone, Arata offers to accompany her, which she happily accepts. Meanwhile, Hanuka finishes her practice early, telling Rina she needs to study for the makeup exams. Just as she's about to leave, rain starts pouring, prompting her to return to the club room for an umbrella. While nearing the door, Hanuka overhears fellow volleyball team members gossiping about her talent, stirring up old memories. Overwhelmed, she hesitates to enter. Suddenly, she hears footsteps and hides, only to find Rina approaching. As Rina approaches the door, she, too, overhears the gossip. Without hesitation, she bursts into the room, confronting the girls and defending Hanuka's hard work and talent. She urges them to acknowledge Hanuka's efforts, ensuring they don't fall behind. Feeling embarrassed, the girls hastily retreat, leaving Rina to ponder what could motivate them to practice more. Meanwhile, Hanuka, concealed behind a mirror, couldn't help but shed a few tears of gratitude towards Rina for her support. To make studying easier, Hanuka regularly meets up with her childhood friend Akira, and they hit the books together late into the night almost every day. As the time for makeup tests approaches, Hanuka successfully clears all of them, while Arata, unfortunately, falls short. Overjoyed by success, Hanuka rushes to the volleyball practice despite the teacher's advice to take it easy. However, during practice, she seems pale and drained. The strain of countless late-night study sessions catches up with her, causing her to briefly black out and scatter the balls across the gym hall. As Rihanna quickly recovers from the fall, she seems fine, but an unexpected rogue ball disrupts her midair, causing her to lose balance and injure herself upon landing. Rushing to the nurse's office, it's revealed that Rina has sprained her ankle, forcing her to sit out of practice for the next 2 to 3 weeks, potentially jeopardizing her participation in the upcoming tournament, which is particularly significant as it's their final competition before high school ends. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Hanuka feels terrible for inadvertently causing the jury. Attempting to offer apologies and optimism, Hanuka suggests Rina's ankle might heal in time for the tournament. However, Rina, overwhelmed with the situation and the frustration, lashes out, expressing doubts about her ability to perform well without practice. She also implies that Hanuka, being the team's star player, makes her contributions unnecessary. Distress triggers memories of past mistreatment for Hanuka, leading her to lose her composure, burst into tears, and flee, leaving Rina behind to ponder the unfortunate turn of events. Chizuru notices Hanuka's unusual behavior, but when she asks about it, Hanuka skirts around the issue, choosing to avoid discussing it directly. Upon her return to school from the hospital, Rita promptly seeks out Kokoro. She updates her teacher on her recovery timeline, mentioning that it'll take about 2 weeks for her ankle to heal. Kokoro, relieved at the news and hopeful for Rita's participation in the tournament, expresses her joy. However, Rita surprises Kokoro by announcing her decision not to play, citing missed practice sessions as the reason. Despite Kokoro's attempts to persuade her otherwise, Rita remains steadfast in her choice to withdraw from the volleyball team. Encountering Rita in the hallway, Chizuru and Hanuka are taken aback when Hanuka suddenly dashes away, leaving Chizuru puzzled. In the classroom after school, Arata, Rita, and Kazuomi are the last ones remaining. Arata seizes the chance to leave them alone, hoping to foster a romantic moment between Rita and Kazuomi. However, Rita reveals she stayed back to avoid being seen limping. Though she urges Kazuomi to go home ahead of her, he insists on walking with her. Sensing something troubling her, Kazuomi encourages Rita to open up to him. As Kazuomi tries to help Rita stand up, the pain shooting through her ankle causes her to lose her balance and tumble over. Recognizing her discomfort, Kazuomi offers his shoulder for support as they descend the stairs. Despite accepting his assistance, Rita can't help but feel disappointed in herself for her behavior towards others. The next day, Chizuru finds herself sitting alone during lunch, puzzled by the odd behavior of both her new friends. Meanwhile, at home, Murata reflects on the awkward tension among them, reminiscent of his past experiences at work. Suddenly, he receives a text message from Chizuru, who's come over to discuss a troubling matter. Upon Chizuru's arrival, Arata feels a bit flustered by the prospect of being alone with her. But his thoughts are quickly interrupted by Rina's message indicating that both she and Ryo are listening in on their conversation. Chizuru expresses her concern about Rina and Hanuka's recent behavior, wondering if Arata knows what's going on. Admitting his ignorance about the situation, Arata praises Chizuru for her improved social skills, appreciating her discretion in not directly confronting the issue, which could have exacerbated matters. Chizuru opens up about her experience with bullying in her previous class, revealing how her attempts to intervene only worsened the situation, ultimately leading one of her classmates to switch schools. Moved by her story, Arata shares a similar incident from his workplace, framing it as if it happened in his previous school. He recounts how he tried to stand up for a senior who was being bullied, but inadvertently made things worse. When Chizuru inquires about the outcome for the senior, Arata hesitates, his breath quickening as he recalls the tragic end. Unable to answer, he becomes visibly distressed, clutching his neck as memories flood back of finding his co-worker's lifeless body. Concerned for his well-being, Chizuru approaches Arata, asking him what's wrong. In the grip of the distressing memory and hyperventilation, Arata momentarily confuses Chizuru for his late senior. In a moment of vulnerability, he pulls her into a tight embrace, apologizing profusely. Rather than pulling away, Chizuru remains in the hug, allowing him to gradually calm down. She gently prompts him to explain the reason for his apology. Arata swiftly regains his composure, releasing Chizuru and apologizing for his sudden grip. Rather than being upset, Chizuru is relieved to see him back to himself. Returning to the issue of Rina and Hanuka, Chizuru expresses her discomfort with the current tension and her desire to mend things. Arata agrees, but admits his fear of making matters worse. In a bold move, Chizuru resolves to confront her past and overcome her painful memories, rather than avoiding them. Extending her hand to Arata, she invites him to join her in facing their demons. Encouraged by their determination, Arata eagerly accepts. The following day, they approach Hanuka during her late volleyball practice. As Akira and Nobuniva arrive to pick her up, they realize she's missing and head to the club room. Before entering, they overhear Hanuka confiding in Chizuru and Arata, expressing her remorse for Rina's injury and her role in the situation. Upon hearing this, Akira fetches Rina, accompanied by the concerned Kazuomi. Together, they listen as Hanuka reveals her true feelings about volleyball in high school.
Inside the room, Hanuka explains that she started to hate sports at her previous schools. Even though she loved them, her natural talent made others jealous. Seeing that she hurt people, she decided not to stand out on her high school volleyball team. However, on the first day, Rina recognized her and told her not to hold back. Hanuka complied and hit the ball without holding back, accidentally hitting Rina in the face. Despite this, Rina laughed and asked her to enjoy playing together for the next 3 years. Yet, Hanuka worries that she might snap again and lose her friend. Shizaru shares that as a kid, she transferred schools a lot and eventually gave up on making friends. She struggles to talk, but Arata places a hand on her back, giving her the strength to tell Hanuka that she needs to treasure her friendships and not give up like she did. The next evening, the redhead doesn't arrive for the match, and Chiso gets tired of waiting. She asks if anyone has Rina's address so she can drag her there to play. Ryo quickly sends Arata the address, which he finds creepy but still goes with Chiso to find her. He doesn't miss the chance to make Arata aware that he's changing. At Rina's home, they pretend to be delivery people to get her to open the door. When she tries to close it, Arata calls her out for wearing the uniform, knowing she wants to go.
Rina refuses strongly, but both of them scold her, saying as friends, they are entitled to worry about her even if they don't go through the same hardships. Rina snaps back until the black-haired girl Chiso gets tired and lightly hits her forehead. Chizaru explains that their selfish desire is for her to play, and her desire is to play too, so there's nothing stopping her. Rina then breaks down crying, saying she wants to play but feels she can't just show up after 2 weeks. Chiso comforts her and convinces her to go. Arata gets an urgent call informing him that their team is struggling. He hurriedly rushes to the scene. A girl with black hair hands over her hair ties to Rina, allowing her to play without discomfort. Rina then approaches Hanaka, expressing her sorrow and seeking forgiveness. Hanaka readily accepts her apology and also apologizes for her sprain. Unfortunately, the match doesn't turn out as they hoped, leading the girls to tear up outside with Chisaru in the middle. They openly confess their mistakes and express their regret. Despite the loss, Rina acknowledges the enjoyment she found in the match and pledges to continue playing volleyball with her friend in college. They both express gratitude to the awkward girl for her persistence, hugging her tightly. From a distance, the boys watch, content that everything concludes positively. They then invite the girls to join them for another match, prompting the players to rush in eagerly. Arata asks Ryo for a pill to become an adult again, wanting to visit a coworker's grave for its anniversary. Ryo hesitates due to Arata's past instability, fearing self-harm or confrontations with ex-coworkers. Arata insists he's trustworthy, but panics when Ryo touches his neck. Eventually, Ryo agrees to accompany him and goes to the office to get the pills. Onaya asks to join Arata, but he says no, upsetting her. He asks for a favor the next day in class. Shizaru sees Arata's suit and comments. They meet at Arata's apartment to take the pill and sleep. He wakes up, stumbles on the train, and chats with Arata. He gets a message from Onaya. At the grave, Arata recalls events leading to a coworker's suicide and cold reactions from colleagues. Losing a happy, kind, and hardworking woman over a cruel company was unbearable for him. His boss showed no mercy, and things went downhill. He couldn't get out of bed, struggled to find a job, and socializing made him sick. Ryo brings him back to reality, and they start leaving. They pass by a man and a woman who recognize him from his old company. They saw pictures and heard their boss bragging about him. They admire him and Sasuke as heroes, but are afraid to quit. The protagonist's heart warms, and he honestly tells them how hard it was to get back on his feet and how bad he felt. He lies about still working at the convenience store, but ultimately, he's glad he quit. On the train, Ryo praises Arata's actions. Arata asks if Ryo set up the meeting, but Ryo denies it. Ryo questions Arata's job lie, but Arata doesn't see the experiment as real work. Flashback. Ryo asked Onaya to inform him if the co-workers visited the grave, as they respected Arata. This surprises Onaya, as it might look like Arata is getting involved again. Back to the present. Onaya texts Ryo about the meeting. Ryo replies briefly, and Arata thanks him for making him feel better. Summer break nears. Chizaru talks to Arata, who notices new hair ties. Onaya hugs Arata, making Chizaru jealous. Ryo pulls Onaya away. Arata mentions Onaya's friendship with Chizaru, who feels uneasy about her formal address. In class, Arata looks forward to the summer, but Kazumi warns about makeup exams. Kazumi will study for prep exams, surprising Rina, who thought he'd attend Oba University. Kazumi wants to keep options open. The supervisors celebrate the first term's end at Arata's place, upsetting him. They explain it's easier since the lab delivers alcohol. They mock Arata for lacking vacation plans due to exams but ask for updates. They'll also be at school as part of their job to blend in. They discuss setting up Arata and another girl, asking Ryo to get close to the class rep to make her jealous. Ryo stops them, saying they should consider her feelings, but they mock him. Ryo tells Arata he should experience love, as he'll be forgotten after the experiment, upsetting him. The next day at lunch, Kazu sits with Arata and asks about his love life. Kazu questions if Arata has someone in mind, asking about kissing and holding hands. This flusters Arata, who doesn't relate his affection to Rina as love. Kazu asks if Arata has kissed anyone, and when Arata nods, Kazu starts calling him names. Kazu's words linger in Arata's mind, distracting him during his test. After classes, they walk home and see Rina with a man. They hide to spy, and Arata recognizes the man as a new hire from his ex-company. Kazumi panics, thinking they might be dating, but when he sees the man hold Rina's waist to prevent her from falling, he runs up to them. The man asks who Kazumi is, and Rina explains he's a friend. The man smiles and explains he was helping Rina due to a heat stroke, offering to drive her to the station, but she declined. Kazumi leaves, reassured she's in good hands, and Arata texts him to take Rina home. As they walk, Kazumi can't take his eyes off Rina's hand. He starts relating his friend's words to the redhead and texts Kazu that he loves her, which Kazu celebrates. The next day at school, Kazuomi tells the blonde guy to confess at the fireworks festival to prevent anyone from stealing Rina. Ryo and Shisu join their conversation, and Kazuomi seeks their advice for his confession, but they're unhelpful. Even Arata, when Kazuomi deems a ladies' man. Amidst the chaos, Kazuomi decides to invite Rina. That night, he texts Rina, who panics and asks her friends for advice, only to realize he invited them too, so she panicked for nothing. While deciding what to wear, Rina asks the girls to arrange moments for her and Kazu to be alone so she can confess her feelings. When they arrive, Shizaru is last, and they finally enter. The group starts separating into couples, with Shizaru needing Ryo's arm for support, due to dizziness from the crowd. Arata discusses giving the young couple space to bloom, but when he looks back, he sees the other couple, giving him a bad feeling. He panics, unsure about the girls' feelings. Eventually, Rina and Kazu end up alone, receiving messages from their friends to enjoy themselves, though they don't feel ready. Back with the group, Ryo approaches Arata, who asks Ryo to control his coworker for being too clingy. Ryo refuses, confronting Arata about his dislike of Ryo being with Shizaru. Arata denies it, but Ryo uses Arata's own advice against him, telling him to enjoy the summer. Kazu and Rina stand together, looking where the fireworks should be. They chat briefly, and Kazu confesses to Rina, surprising her. After a moment, Rina gathers courage and confesses to Kazu, asking him out. After figuring out their feelings, they agree to date and hold hands. Meanwhile, Arata and Shizaru realize they've lost Kazu and Rina, and Arata realizes he's been set up. While waiting for fireworks, Shizaru mentions how easy it is for Arata to make friends, and he points out she's made many friends too. Shizaru expresses her happiness at meeting Arata, and he wonders if she meant something more, but brushes it aside. They discuss how fireworks are pretty, but lonely, as they fade after exploding. Shizaru, part of the ReLIFE experiment number 1, remembers every moment since meeting Arata and fears he'll forget her. She mumbles about him being like fireworks, but he can't hear her. They see the new couple holding hands, and everyone congratulates them before enjoying the fireworks together. After the show, Arata and Shizaru go home together, but stop at a park because she feels dizzy. They talk about how sad it is that they'll have to part ways, but they choose to live in the moment. He touches her face, but switches to patting her head, asking her to live her life to the fullest. He remembers the advice he gave to Kazu while staring at her lips, but she calls his name, bringing him back to reality. He lets go and tells her to go home, dealing with the fact that he'll lose her. As she stands, she loses balance and falls on him, making it hard for him to pull away. As they walk, he mocks her for tripping, offering his arm for support. He promises to never forget her, and she promises the same. Meanwhile, Ryo and another employee listen and write a report on them. The boy reminds Ryo that he'll be the girl's support during the next term of classes. As classes resume, Kazu is class rep again, with Rina as his lunch companion. Rina confronts Shizaru, thinking she'll let her win, but Shizaru denies it. Rina asks if something was wrong during her test, and Hanuka suggests she might have been thinking about Arata. This clicks for Rina, but Shizaru doesn't understand. Rina thanks Shizaru for clearing her mind. Later, Rina meets Ryo behind the school, asking if Arata is part of the ReLIFE program. Ryo explains he can't reveal anything, as it could expel Arata from the experiment, and she'd never see him again. Ryo praises Rina for getting more involved with people, and informs her that she'll have a new supervisor. They go to Rina's place, where she tries to get information from the new supervisor, but he brushes her off. Rina remembers her program got extended because she failed her first year and falls asleep, treasuring a picture of her with her new friends. As the cultural festival approaches, the class prepares by deciding group officials. Kazurumi suggests the protagonist as an official, thinking he'll come up with something fun and improve his grade score. Chizaru volunteers to help, surprising the protagonist. After the class, they brainstorm ideas, deciding on an English-style cafe, which brings problems like costumes and food. Chizaru explains she volunteered to do something useful, and because of the protagonist's advice during the fireworks festival. They give all the paperwork to Kazu, a massive pile of schedules and budgets. The protagonist notices Rina isn't with Kazu and asks about it. Turns out that Rina asked to come over, but Kazurumi shut her down, upsetting her. Kazu explains his big brother became a shut-in after losing his job, and rubbing his happiness in his brother's face felt wrong. Arata suggests Kazu act normally around his brother, but Kazu thinks Rina wouldn't approve. Chizaru recognizes Rina's perfectionism but knows she wouldn't push anyone, understanding how self-image affects people. Chizaru and the protagonist calm Kazurumi down, and he decides to tell Rina the truth. Chizaru wonders how the protagonist could easily ease Kazurumi's worries, and he recognizes her awesomeness for knowing Rina so well. They fall silent as they walk, and the protagonist wonders how Chizaru would feel if she knew the real him, which bothers him. Days pass, and the festival preparations grow, with the new couple looking livelier and the whole class joining the youthful excitement. When the protagonist returns from borrowing stuff, he finds Chizaru asleep at her desk, but hesitates to caress her hair, realizing he might be in love with her. The day of the festival arrives, and everyone wears Victorian outfits. Kazu tries to cover himself with his sweatshirt, ashamed, while Kazurumi tries to convince him to take it off. Chizaru enters in full costume, making the protagonist blush. She mentions they should enjoy the moment before turning to do something else. Noticing the protagonist's crooked tie, she goes to fix it, making him nervous. The cafe gets busy, and everyone delights in the kids. Hanukkah starts mentioning the types of butlers they have. And when Ryo asks for the protagonist's type, she mentions he's an all type, due to his mature aura. When the flow stops, they decide to take a picture, but the protagonist decides to take it instead of being in it. He then goes to Chizaru, who's giving out pamphlets outside. The protagonist sits with Chizaru, but their homeroom teacher finds them and tells them to look at the festival together. Remembering his questions, Chizaru makes a move, holding the boy's arm close, making him flustered. He tries to avoid the topic, but she asks if he thinks she might have an infatuation with him. She quickly confesses she was trying to confirm something. He eases her, saying she was trying to figure something out, but feelings can't be determined on the spur of the moment, as they flourish with time. He tries to pat her head, but can't bring himself to do so. They visit some stalls, but Anne, hearing the conversation, seems sad. At the bonfire, Ryo preaches to the protagonist about asking for his friend's experiences. The protagonist explains it feels unfair to force his friends to share his youth, but is grateful. They chat about his worries of vanishing from his friend's existence, but Ryo explains some of his actions will remain in the form of their effects on people. On the other hand, Ryo approaches Chizaru to ask about her experience, insisting on her relationship with the protagonist, but she doesn't say much about it. A few days later, students have one-on-one conversations with their teachers. When it's the protagonist's turn, he mentions wanting to get into Oba University. But the teacher scolds him for his grades and explains the tests evaluate the type of adult he wants to be. After the chat, he meets Kazu and Chizaru, who want to go to the same college, exciting Kazu. However, the protagonist starts to resent losing the friends he made. Later that night, Ryo reaches out to ask about the chat, but the protagonist isn't in the mood. He asks if there's a chance he can grow old with his friends, but Ryo denies it, explaining he can't grow old but can remain friends after the experiment. Back at the lab, An is making her report when Ryo arrives. They make small talk, but Chizaru points out her subject's response to the vocational talk, wondering if they're doing the right thing by letting them get closer. She knows they'll forget each other once the experiment ends. And though Ryo tries to ease her, she breaks out crying, finding the picture too painful. Ryo caresses her head, reminding her they can only support them in this new fleeting experience. Chizaru wonders about it all, but thinks figuring out her feelings makes no sense as things are about to end. Despite struggling to come to terms with being forgotten, all they can do is look at each other as the picture is taken. With Christmas approaching and intern exams being calmer, all students seem relaxed except for the protagonist who still has makeups. While Kazurumi helps him study, the blonde boy asks for his adult to help choose a place for a Christmas date with his girlfriend. The man teases Kazurumi, asking if he's ready for adulthood, but the pure boy doesn't understand. Feeling embarrassed, Kazurumi asks why the protagonist doesn't invite Chizaru on a date, as he and his girlfriend think they love each other. This leaves the protagonist thinking, but he doesn't feel it's right despite his real desires. Since the festival, Chizaru has been recklessly avoiding him. Before class, the girls ask the black-haired girl what's going on between them. She explains she's confused about her feelings and doesn't know what to do. Hanuka loses patience, but Rina stops her, saying the girl should figure it out on her own and expressing faith in her. During lunch, Hanuka suggests Rina ask Arata on a date. This leaves an impression on Rina, and she approaches the protagonist, inviting him to hang out. She tries to mention it's a date, but can't bring herself to say it, so she texts him later. That night, Arata nervously paces in his room until he receives Rina's message, which starts like a work email but ends with a cute love sticker, easing him. However, she then mentions it's a date, leaving him baffled. On the train, he remembers talking to Ryo, who was definitely aware of it, about it, as it would make his report richer. He worries about the date being just an illusion for Rina once the experiment ends, but he's happy she invited him. They meet at the agreed place too early, both used to adult social cues. She gives him a pile of paperwork, explaining she researched everyday options but couldn't come up with a plan. He smiles and urges her to take the first place that seemed good. They walk around the mall, chatting about their friends and themselves while being supervised by Ryo and Anne. Anne asks if they're really meant to be there, but Ryo brushes it off while sending a text to the protagonist, who is at a gift shop with his date. Chizaru shows the protagonist a keychain for his Christmas present. He tells her any choice is fine. She buys it, and he buys a similar one for her Christmas and birthday present. They walk and ride the Ferris wheel, chatting about their year and feeling gloomy about the protagonist's birthday. They promise not to forget the date and spend more time together. After the ride, they walk, and the protagonist confesses his love, and she feels the same. It starts raining, and they share an umbrella, holding hands all the way home. The last exams end, and everyone is excited for graduation, except for the new couple, who still hurt. That night, Chizaru and Arata talk on the phone, knowing it'll end soon. On graduation day, everyone writes goodbye messages, and the protagonist writes a simple, "Thank you." After everyone leaves, the black-haired girl turns to bow at the school and asks for a hug. They hug tightly, promising not to forget each other, but knowing they will forget as they're test subjects. At home, their supervisors give them job options and pills to return to normal. Everything goes well with Arata, but Chizaru makes a heartbreaking discovery. She finds a marker with "I was in love with Kaizaki Arata" written on it, breaking her down. Arata chooses to work at ReLIFE Fee and often goes to have drinks with his ex-supervisors. He keeps a keychain but can't remember who it belongs to. One day, he crosses paths with an adult Chizaru, and they chat briefly. She mentions she was a test subject for 2 years, and they both feel lonely, like fireworks. They hug each other, finding each other after all they've been through.